All right, we got Brad Swail in the house.
Thanks for
Did I
having
say the
me.
last name?
Yeah, you said it right.
All
Swail.
right, perfect.
Yeah.
There we go. Easy enough. There's quite a bit we want to cover here today. I got to meet you through a mutual friend.
Yep.
And we had a little breakfast to get to know one another.
You were barefoot.
Yeah. Well, that's a hippie restaurant. if you ever come to Austin for Paleo FX or any of these cool events that they have here, South by ACL, make your way to Pacha. No affiliation with these guys, but they do hands down the best organic breakfast brunch place I've ever been to.
Yeah, I mean, growing up here, I don't know how long it's been around. I've never even heard of it. But the first time meeting you, I mean, I knew you were sort of into a different lifestyle than what you typically meet or whatever. And when you were barefoot, I was like, he's got it going on. He knows what's up.
Yeah, the hippie restaurants don't mind if I come in barefoot, or at least they don't act like they notice. It might just be like a size thing where they see me and they're like, we usually don't let people in barefoot, but he gets a pass. I'm not sure. I have to be mindful of that.
Sure.
I always forget what kind of meat wagon I have on. But let's talk. You come from Austin, born and raised, correct?
Born and raised. I'm told. I mean, people are sometimes amazed by that, and I don't know why. But I guess it's with all of California and Houston and everyone else coming here. Yeah, I'm a rare breed, I guess.
You are a rare breed.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about what life was like growing up with your family and the family company and all that was involved with that.
Yeah. So my dad started People's Pharmacy. I guess since this is online, I'm supposed to say People's RX because there's a People's Pharmacy newsletter that's based in Florida, I think. And so we're People's RX, Austin's favorite pharmacy. So yeah, I mean, it's a holistic pharmacy that, you can still get your regular prescriptions there and over-the-counter stuff, Claritin, Oxycontins, whatever.
Good and bad, depending on how you look at it or how it's used.
Yeah, and so we also have, my dad had this vision of changing people's health. He realized early on that there's something going on with pharmaceuticals that, they're not the answer necessarily. They'll help your symptoms, they'll help you in a pinch or stuff like that. But to really get healthy, you got to change your diet, change your lifestyle. And so he started this business and brought on a lot of nutraceuticals, professional lines of, supplements and everything like that. Organic delis, organic when available, to let food be that medicine. It's painted on the wall at the back of one of the delis. So, I mean, I grew up in that store. It was like a second home to me, like my third place, home, school, People's Pharmacy. And I mean, I didn't know what I had growing up. It's like, your kid, he doesn't understand what he has, like how good he has it yet. But I'm sure once he hits college and stuff like that, he's going to like really realize like, shit, this is like, I really had it good. I had to, I got to have conversations with alternative practitioners of all sorts. And I mean, to me, it was just normal. I would ask my dad to take me to the mall to maybe buy a video game or something like that. Well, let's stop by the pharmacy real quick, take 5 minutes. All right. Yeah, right. And hours later, I'm still sitting in the pharmacy. So all I have to entertain myself, I'm looking at bottles of supplements, leaflets, talking to practitioners, talking to pharmacists, screwing around in the lab sometimes. Back then, it was a little bit more Wild West.
Hopefully you weren't tinkering with medications. I could see my son doing some shit like that.
I was. I mean, the hard stuff was up top. I couldn't reach that. But I would get to mess with the tools, and because it's a compounding pharmacy. So they also got to, they make stuff there too. So yeah, I mean, it was a unique experience for sure. And I don't really like to use, I think the term privileged gets thrown around a lot nowadays, with not a lot of care of like what it really means. But in this aspect, I really was privileged to, have access to that sort of information and those sort of conversations with people my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm happy you brought that up too, because it's something that, I'll try to use language that doesn't point fingers or anything like that, because I've been called out on it before. And of course, when you're pointing fingers, that creates more division. And that's certainly not my intention when I talk about things like that. But The idea that privilege is a bad thing is complete nonsense. Like, to count your blessings is one of the easiest ways to embody gratitude. But just looking at the ways that we are blessed, the ways that we have been privileged, and to know that that's not only is it okay, but it is awesome to recognize that. It is awesome to say, yeah, man, I had a lot of good things, fortuitous events that led me to where I am at today.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think it's a very weird societal position to put yourself in, to blame others for having good fortune.
Yeah, it's yeah, and there's also there's another side of the coin. Growing up with a entrepreneurial father who's trying to grow this, what turned into sort of an Austin mainstay. He, I mean, I love my father. It's not a complaint, but obviously there's a, maybe there was times when I wouldn't actually get to, get that FaceTime with my dad that I really wanted to, but so there's a balance there.
There's two sides to every coin, no doubt about it. I mean,
Absolutely.
Even if you look at somebody who's as successful as Gary Vee, and he's talking about, and this is going off topic, I promise I'll circle back, but he was on Mark Bell's podcast, and he was talking about every parent is trying to win the game in the first 3 innings. You're a parent for your entire life.
Yeah.
And he's trying to leave a legacy behind for his kids. And he is. There's no doubt about it. My pushback against that argument is that perhaps the first 3 innings are more important than we think it is. It's not a baseball game, right?
Yeah.
If a baseball game has 7 innings plus whatever, or not 7, 9 innings plus whatever, and you get the 7th inning stretch and all that jazz, you have it. You would look at each inning as equal for the most part until you're coming down the home stretch.
Yeah.
But with children in particular, early on is pretty significant. So I wouldn't say that it's okay to put your kids on the back burner for your job or whatever legacy you think is more important than your kids. If you've chosen to have kids, it's important to be involved in their lives. And it sounds like, looking from the outside in, that you did have some of that balance, at least back and forth.
Oh yeah. I mean, my mom was, ideally parenting is a 2-person game, or, whatever, however it works. And so my mom was, didn't work for the most part. I mean, she helped with the pharmacies in the very beginning, and, then she took time off to, help with kids and more. I mean, I'm the youngest of 4, so that's a busy job in and of itself. So I agree with you. The first 3 innings, if we're sticking with that analogy, I would say are the most important. Getting that bonding with your child, letting them, imprinting on them, is super important.
There's a great book that I'll leave people with before we switch gears here. It's called Hold On to Your Kids. It's written by Dr. Gabor Mate and another doctor, and it's read, if you listen to it on Audible, by Gabor Mate's son, which is fucking awesome because he's reading what his dad wrote, and obviously he helped contribute to it, but it's really cool to see kind of, Gabor's vulnerability in admitting where he kind of failed as a dad and how he learned otherwise.
Yeah. I'm familiar with his work. I think I have his book. I have not read it yet. I mean, I
want to get into all his literature and definitely have him on the show. But, one of the reasons that we're here today is to discuss some new technologies and to discuss what's going on at home and some of the purpose behind the potentials of these new technologies.
Yeah, man. So, talking about parenting, it was always really important to me that my kids have, a close relationship with, I mean, even before having kids, I've always thought it would be the opposite before I had kids, that I would assume that I would work as many jobs as I would have to, and my wife, whoever that may end up being, would stay at home with the kids. Ended up being the opposite. When our first child was born, my wife was at home, and she ended up it was just not really for her. She really wanted to go back to work. She's an attorney. And you spend all that time and money on education. She really wanted to use it. So I said, that's fine, but I'm going to stay home. So I ended up being a stay-at-home dad for a few years. I think the best decision I've ever made, being able to bond with my kid that way. And then we had our second kid, Lachlan. We call him Chow Chow.
Chow Chow.
Yeah, he's my older son gave him that name before he was born. And he has super rare, He has a super rare genetic disorder called 8p partial deletion duplication syndrome. I apologize. I get a little bit.
Don't say sorry, brother.
So on his 8th chromosome, he has some genes that are deleted and some that are duplicated. And within this 8p diagnosis, there's some kids that have just deletions, some have just duplications, and it's super rare. I think they estimate that there's maybe 1,000 people in the world that have it. In the United States, I mean, maybe 100. But when he was born, thankfully I was a stay-at-home dad, so I could spend a lot of time, being with him and helping him and sort of figuring out how to manage this crazy diagnosis. He is he's happy, which I think is what everyone wants for their kids. I sometimes wonder if he knows sort of if he understands at some level that he's different. And I don't know that he does. And I think that's sort of a blessing, that I think if I was in his position, I don't know that I would want to know the life that I have going forward. So we get this crazy diagnosis where we had no idea going in, before he was born that this was happening. There was some indication that maybe something was wrong, but the doctor put it at like maybe a couple percentage points increase in likelihood that he would have spina bifida was sort of the guess. And we're like, well, that's fine. Whatever. No big deal. We went and did some level 2 ultrasounds just to make sure that everything was okay. That doctor was, supposedly one of the best ultrasound doctors in San Antonio. We were there at the time. And I'm blown away at the things that he missed. One of the common, I guess, associated diagnoses with this is agenesis of the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is the center part of your brain that communicates the left and right hemisphere, sort of the superhighway. So his just never formed. And typically that would show up in even just like a regular ultrasound. But somehow they missed that. And then there's, like they said, that his legs were measuring short compared to the rest of his body. But they're like, it's no big deal. He'll grow out of it or whatever. And so we're just, happy-go-lucky, thinking, great, we're having another kid. And then he's born, and immediately something is off, And he spends a couple weeks in the NICU. The biggest issue there was getting him to eat. He has a high risk of aspiration, so he can't eat on his. He still does. He needs a lot of help eating. And so, I remember to get him out of the NICU, we had to do a feeding study where he had to drink so much from a bottle within a 24-hour period. And so they gave me my own room at the NICU. And I was doing everything I could, every trick that the nurses, taught me to get him to feed. And luckily we got that and got him home. And he's gotten better for sure at that. But, now he's sort of refusing the bottle a little bit more, which is normal. We're glad that he's making that progression. But, now we're trying to get him to eat solids, and that's a whole another challenge when you're at risk of aspirating anything. He actually has aspiration pneumonia right now because he was just, things were going down the wrong pipe enough that he has a little infection, and luckily it's mild, but we have to take a couple steps back now before we can take another step forward. It's a real interesting experience. I'm glad it's me and not somebody else. Because of, my experience growing up, realizing that there are potential alternatives to just, the Western medical system, which, I mean, thank God it was there for him, but, looking at and exploring other options, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, we're looking at CRISPR technology, gene editing. It just sort of makes sense to me that if he has deletions and duplications on his genome, then, well, let's knock those out. Let's knock out the duplications. Let's add some stuff in. Let's do whatever we need to do. And my goal originally was to have something done by age 2, but the scientists weren't quite ready for that,
Yeah.
So now it's age 5. And if I need to adjust my expectations, I will. But, we're fighting right now for to get that by age 5, get a study going. If not for him, then somebody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I remember talking to you about that. It's certainly the position you're in is a position that no parent wants to find themselves in.
Yeah.
I mean, that there's absolutely zero doubt about that. And of course, with your background, there's nothing wrong with Western medicine per se, but when we give all of our authority over to it and we just take every word the doctor says as set in stone, this is the only way, that's where we run into trouble. But through your background, you've come to realize that there is alternative and functional medicine doctors, and there's a different way to go about things. Now, from a technological standpoint, with CRISPR and some other things being made available, there are options that hopefully can remedy, right? The conversation we were having was the conversation that comes up for me around CRISPR is we don't know. We don't know what happens when we change something, if something happens downstream effects, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the larger conversation around, what is happening in China? Are they trying to create a super race? And
definitely.
If that
for sure.
if that happens, then how long is it before the rest of humanity decides to join in?
Yeah.
Right. Like if there's pressure because there's a billion people that are exceptionally smart or exceptionally gifted in athleticism or any of these things that we would consider criteria for being a great human. If that happens, if and when that happens, it's only a matter of time before everyone else joins in. Because it's no longer the argument of what is right or wrong. What is, are we tinkering with, are we playing God?
Yeah.
I guess is the answer. In your circumstance, all of those arguments go out the window.
Yeah.
None of that shit matters. It's literally about saving a life. It's about creating what we come to understand as life for your son.
Yeah. And I guess let me say, CRISPR is sort of my idea of what would be an ideal therapy for him. And I think there's different kinds of CRISPR technologies that, like, they might use different, like there's Cas9, there's Cas12, different numbers, different sizes of the protein or whatever that carries the RNA and changes everything. I mean, if it's not CRISPR and it's stem cells, like, hey, we're game, no big deal. But yeah, I mean, in China there was a big news story, maybe 6 months ago or something like that, a year ago, where a guy altered the genome of some twins to be more resistant to HIV. And I don't think these girls were necessarily at high risk of HIV, but I think he was just trying to test out the technology, and there was a big ethical issue with that. And I agree with that ethical issue because I don't think this guy knew what he was doing necessarily. And speaking to that downstream effect, and I've read that there's a potential that maybe these girls would have a higher IQ because of this edit. And the higher IQ was not the reason for doing it, but I mean, I guess that's sort of a happy side effect.
Yeah.
And I don't see that as really being a problem. I don't know that having more high IQ people in the world is going to hurt us. Having stronger people in the world, I don't know that's going to hurt us. It might change the Olympics or change, MMA or whatever, and we can address those issues as we go down. But I mean, my personal belief is that I would be happy if it was more available. It's like cell phones costs thousands and thousands of dollars when they first came out, and then the price eventually started going down because people invested in it, people bought those phones. and eventually the price will come down and everyone will get it. I'm sure there will be some sort of evil person that makes some evil change, and it has a negative effect. But I think overall it'll have a very positive effect for sure. But you're right. In my situation, or in my son's situation, all that does go out the window. I mean, if whatever therapy comes along that might help him, the downstream effects, without knowing exactly what it is, I mean, I'd be pretty much game for anything. He's, so just, give you a little bit of background of what he's like. He's, looking at him, he would look like a sort of a regular 2-year-old. He's, got some odd features. If you looked at him long enough, you might think, oh, it's a little bit weird, but nothing that would cue you to think he has a genetic disorder. But then you might hold him and you think this 2-year-old is real weak. He doesn't have like the muscle tone. He's, obviously he's not talking. He's not doing a lot of stuff that other 2-year-olds would be doing. And so then you start to realize, so has slow reaction times. Like I said, he's weak. He has kind of floppy. He's getting stronger, which is great. We're using technology like NewFit. Have you heard of them?
Yeah, they're great. We had Garrett on the show.
Yeah, Garrett's great.
Yeah, phenomenal technology.
Yeah, so we're using NewFit on him at home, and notice some great results. But teaching him to walk is going to be a risk. He's going to have, if he is walking and he's not, kids fall, he's going to fall harder than any other kid. He's going to be weaker and he's going to have a slower reaction time. So should I teach him to walk, or should I not do that because he might fall down those stairs and not be able to protect himself and potentially die? I mean, I want him to have as normal of a life as possible and have as much freedom as possible. So of course I'm going to teach him to walk. Of course I'm going to do those things. And I sort of think of that as, with any technology, any sort of potential therapy, like side effects be damned, unless it's like there's a 100%, 90% chance he's going to die from this tomorrow. Well, all right, let's step back. But maybe he gets cancer down the line. I'm at risk of that, Cancer treatments are getting better. Is it, can we live with those things? It's a difficult decision, but I think I would say yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just the access and the ability to, as a parent, consciously decide what's going to happen to your child.
Yeah.
I think that's where the argument needs to be made. What's going on right now stateside in terms of its availability? You talked a bit about stuff that's going on with the FDA, where they're at with the use of the technology. Can you dive into some of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, with the technology there are some human trials going on for very specific, when we're talking about CRISPR specifically, for very specific disorders. One of the big ones is sickle cell anemia, which, affects African Americans, and I think just Black people in general. I don't know that if it's in other races very often. I don't think so, but it's an easier fix because it's one base pair in the genome that's affected, and so it's just an easy thing to do. Whereas
single edit.
Yeah, single edit. Whereas with my son, there's multiple genes, and some of those genes are really big. Some of them are small. Some of them, they don't know what they do. So it's a lot more challenging. But I think recently in one of the trials, they actually, I think it remains to be seen because they haven't really seen the side effects yet, but they made the edit in sickle cell anemia, and it worked. And so this person potentially no longer has sickle cell anemia. And I don't know how much you know about that, but that's a really painful disorder. These people have to go, whenever they have an episode, and I don't know very much about it either. Obviously, I've never lived that, but, they have to go to the hospital and take some very, some strong pain medications, oftentimes get hooked on opioids because of that. So it's it has a lot of effects downstream. And so this is a huge step forward, And I think they also do stuff with some types of macular degeneration that are also somewhat simple. So, I mean, the scientists are very interested in getting into human trials, but obviously they're cautious because, like you said, they don't know what the downstream effects are for a lot of these things. If there's, the technology is also it's not 100% accurate, so they may take out this gene, but there's some base pairs on either side that they also might change on accident. And so what are those effects? And, it's there's some challenges still, but I go to some of these conferences for gene editing or CRISPR or, whatever. And my whole goal is to not only learn about it and meet these people, but to, just give them a personal story that might encourage them to, get into those human trials a little bit more, get out of mice models, get out of the petri dish and into humans as quickly as they can.
And what does that timeline look like for you now? I know you'd mentioned 2 in the beginning, and then now you've switched to 5 years old as a hopeful time that could be potential.
Hopeful. Yeah. Hopeful is a big word there.
Yeah.
That's the main word.
What does that look like? And I also know that you're working with you and your wife had started a nonprofit, and then you've kind of switched gears to team up with this other nonprofit that was already in place.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about them. Obviously, I want to get as much steam rolling behind this as possible, but I also want to know where they're at and what they've accomplished.
Right. So, my wife and I started a nonprofit called the Deletion Duplication Alliance, but with my wife's work schedule and taking care of a special needs kid, another son, we have a daughter coming in less than 2 weeks.
Congratulations, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Super excited. It was just overwhelming. I mean, I have a job that I also have to do. I work from home, luckily, but it was just, there's so many moving parts of that, starting a nonprofit, that it just became sort of like, all right, I'm not going to be as successful as I want to be if I'm doing this on my own. So I had a relationship with a mother in New York whose daughter also has the same diagnosis. And she started a nonprofit called Project Ape, projectape.org. And so I called her up and, said, hey, this is what's going on. Like we decided to sort of step back from our own nonprofit. And, so I'm going to try to take a larger role in this. And I was already on the parent leadership board. And so just moving forward, just going to, help them get their message out, get our message out, get people interested. And she's amazing. Her name is Beena Shah. And I honestly, knowing what I know now about what it takes to start a nonprofit and get it to be successful, I mean, I have no idea how she did it. It's crazy. Obviously, I'm one of the great things about just stepping away from my own nonprofit is that I get to work under her, and I mean just the amount that I'll be able to learn from her, and it'll be on a personal level just I think a much better move. But they, before you can do anything like a human trial for any disease, you have to understand the syndrome or the disease, and so you have to take patient surveys and find the commonalities between the patients, and then write up a draft paper for what it's like a natural history survey, I think is what it's called, and figure out how it affects the patients and figure out what the commonalities are. And so what's really interesting about this is on the 8th chromosome, where these deletions and duplications happen, there's a lot of genes that are associated with like Alzheimer's, schizophrenia. What are some of the other ones? A lot of different mental health stuff that they're getting. Like Alzheimer's gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so. It's a horrible disease, but part of one of the side effects of figuring out this, our children's syndrome, is that we might understand more about Alzheimer's, might understand more about schizophrenia. And, this is pretty preliminary stuff. And, we're like, there's Facebook groups that we're a part of. Well, a lot of the parents are reporting that their kids don't get sick very often. And, you think of special needs kids as oftentimes having like a weaker system. And so they'd just be more sickly. And these kids don't seem to have that. Get a runny nose every once in a while, maybe, but like really get sick just doesn't seem to happen very often. And so maybe understanding this more and understanding the genome of these kids might lead to, better immunotherapy or something like that, So there's a lot of potential. We, we're getting, she has gotten a lot of attention from a lot of really big foundations that give money to, for research. I'm not at liberty to say very much about that right now, but, in the next couple of months, there will be some pretty big announcements, which is fantastic. But what we really need to do is just figure out, we need money, obviously, but scientists that are interested. A lot of scientists, their initial response is, this is too complicated. Like, you're going to have a real hard time with this. But, finding those people, finding a neurologist that wants to study the brain of these kids to, really help move forward any sort of treatment. Finding someone to study the nutritional similarities between the kids. Like, is there a commonality between, like, maybe they're deficient, all of them are deficient in, I don't know, vitamin D for whatever reason, even though they all get sun and they're supplementing and whatever, their body doesn't process it the same way. We need those sort of people to sign on and get on board. And we have a doctor right now in Houston that is working on the draft paper for the disease, Dr. Oker, I think. I'm supposed to meet him on Saturday, driving to Houston. So, there's a lot of stuff, really cool stuff going on. That's, like I said, I don't know how she did it, but it's fucking amazing.
Yeah. And that's, it's a brilliant way to bring that forward with what she's done, to understand, like, maybe this condition is so rare that people might not want to touch it because it doesn't affect enough people. But when you start to connect the dots and see that all these things, the concert of what's going on at those exact pairings, potentially could fix Alzheimer's, potentially could fix schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And all the other ways that unfolds. I think that's really intelligent to gather because, look, Alzheimer's has a ton of attention.
Yeah.
It runs in my family on my dad's side. It's one of the reasons I got into a ketogenic diet. Max Lugavere, same thing. He watched his mom go through it, couldn't help her. And then he writes Genius Foods and continues on, and I think it's great when we have a personal reason to get involved. And then from there, we can start to connect the dots and see how many people it can help.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, same thing. My father's sort of going through dementia and Alzheimer's right now, which is very painful to see, of course. And if studying this 8P, deletions and duplications or both leads to a cure for that, you would think that's a huge thing. And Alzheimer's, of course, gets millions and millions of dollars every single year from, private donations and government grants and everything like that. So if we can sort of tack on to that, our little tiny niche of a disorder, ultra rare, then, of course we're going to do that. And if that's the reason why someone wants to study it, because they want to figure out maybe there's a link for Alzheimer's, like, great, let's do that. Like, let's get something going,
Yeah, any reason to get buy-in.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. And buy-in, I think, is the perfect word. So, we've got a lot of doctors interested at like Cornell that are doing that natural history, that they're very beginning stages. And like I said, a guy at in Houston, I think he's at Baylor, Houston, not sure, but we're hoping that getting that going through that process, getting that paper, getting those things, taking those steps, we'll be able to get these other doctors and other researchers, lab scientists that are interested. And the science is there. We think that the science is there. It's ready to go. It's just a matter of finding the right people to do it, that want to do it, that want to take that journey with us, and finding money to get to fund these things.
Yeah.
We estimate that it would be $10 million to a cure, which is, and that would maybe take a few years to find that cure, but having that money, we think that's the estimate that it would take. And in the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty good deal, for the potential of what it could actually, the lives it could change, not only for our kids, but for other patients of other disorders as well.
Yeah.
So we're working on it.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
At least a good starting point and a plan, a way to move forward.
For sure.
You mentioned stem cells. What are some of the other potential therapies that could go alongside this?
It's hard to say because I have a list of all of my son's deletions and duplications. I mean, it's, they're just random letters separated by commas. And I've gone online and, looked at the human genome database and tried to figure out some of them. There's no known anything about them. A lot of them have to do with brain development, obviously. And, I think stem cells, I haven't done as much research on stem cells, but it could, if they can if they could get the body to express different genes through stem cells, I think that's how it works. Might sound like an idiot right now, but then that could be a potential. Like there's, it would not be a permanent change. You'd have to continually get therapy for that over the lifetime of get injections every week or month or whatever, however long the stem cells last. But you're inserting the right gene and getting the body to express that rather than its own genome, which would, hey, if that works, let's do it. No big deal. That seems like it would actually be less risk, because then you just let it run its course and you just don't do it again.
Yeah. But, less potential side effects there. If something did show up abnormally, you wouldn't have to necessarily top back off.
But, we don't even have to do, as far as potential therapies go, just doing everything that we can, nutritional therapy, and other, using current technology that's, developed for other things like NewFit, using that for him to see if that helps. Have you heard of PRTMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a doctor in town that does that, Dr. Paramaswara. We've worked with him going through a round of that to see if that might help. It's, a magnet on the brain to level out the brain waves across the brain so everything is operating on the same frequency. We saw some benefit from that. That was just a little bit more attention, a little bit more willingness to engage and learn from him. From our son, not from Dr. Paramaswara. But it's so, we're open for a lot of different stuff. I think, per your suggestion, when we first met, I started giving him lion's mane mushrooms a lot more. Increased the what's it called? The nerve growth stimulation, nerve ending, something like that with the brain.
Yeah, I think it's like neurotropic growth factor, something like that. NGF and BDNF.
Just giving him those little boosts, And I mean, I talked to Brad Burge of MAPS, And he didn't promote this by any stretch, but as I'm talking to him about all this, the stuff that MAPS is doing with psychedelics, the right word?
Yeah, psychedelic science. That's it. Yeah, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Yeah. I really wish that psilocybin mushrooms were more understood in exactly how they work, because if they help grow it seems like they might help grow new connections in your brain, more neurons, more connections and everything like that. I mean, that would be amazing.
The ability to increase cross connectivity, increase neuroplasticity.
Yeah,
at least on the preliminary work, I think the Beckley Foundation is doing in the UK. There seems to be a bit of that happening,
and it's very low toxicity.
Extremely low. And
right.
that's kind of that's something to point out for people right now that are saying you would give your kids psilocybin mushrooms and the fucking hair on the back of your neck stands up.
Yeah.
The truth is, it is by far one of the safest compounds on the planet.
Yeah.
If you compared it to any pharmaceutical, there's no comparison on safety.
Yeah, and I want to say that that's not Project AP's stance.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not looking at that
no doubt
on a personal level. That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, no doubt. But you're in a position where everything has to be looked at. Everything has to be given a fair shot. Everything that could potentially help, you have to honestly look at and say, can this work? Can this be something that alleviates some symptoms, helps some growth, helps some patchwork take place that is, relatively permanent. That's not, a pharmaceutical pill you have to be on the rest of your life, but something that can actually change the state of the brain for the better long term. And I think those are very valid points and very valid questions. When you think of the potentials of psychedelics and where the science is going, as they've looked at the brain over time, and even more so now with the Renaissance taking place scientifically. We have Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins, who's been on the forefront of studying that in a variety of ways for terminally ill cancer patients and mystical experiences. Can we create a scientific study that would show mystical experience? And obviously that's different than what you're looking at, but it's there and they want more. So they just funded Tim Ferriss, my buddy Craig Nuremberg. I think I mentioned that to you. They just funded a $17 million wing at Johns Hopkins for the studying of psychedelics, and mushrooms are at the forefront of that. And just since they got that to go through, a number of other major universities, I believe University of Florida Gators and Ohio State Buckeyes, are also wanting in, because nobody wants to be last to what could potentially be one of the greatest significant changes in modern medicine through something we've had long before humans existed.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I've heard, I guess, the stoned ape theory about like how we, like, way back in our evolutionary history, apes walking around, they find these mushrooms, they eat them, and they're psilocybin mushrooms, and that helps create like the increase our brain capacity, changing our brains, and that's maybe how part of the story about how we got into being humans from apes.
Yeah, and how we started the foundation of language was a big component of that.
Yeah,
our ability to communicate through story instead of just pointing and drawing, with sticks and dirt, but actually
throwing shit at it.
Yeah, creating language. I don't know, for sure when you talk about that, you have every argument, it's no, it was fire, and no, it was meat, no, it was our ability to create tools and all this shit. And it's like, sure, but if you really think of something that's has potential of that ability, and it's certainly this, we can go back and forth on this at this stage of our understanding of it. But if on 100 years from now, we fully understand the potential of these plant medicines, and we say, we know for a fact, this does increase a lot of the brain's abilities in a variety of ways, and does so to the hardware as well as the software. It's I think that would have quite a bit more steam behind it, in that theory of our evolution, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I have no idea how widely accepted or rejected that theory is, but it's a fun theory to think about, and it, on its face, it seems like it's possible.
Yeah.
And so, when I think of that, the psilocybin mushrooms and, they're, if that theory is part of the story, then, having, microdosing someone with this disorder, I mean, the kids don't speak, and I don't know that I think it depends on if they have a deletion, a duplication, or both. Their outcomes are very different. My son has a deletion and a duplication. Him speaking may not be in the cards. Sometimes we think he's saying hi, but he's probably just groaning. If that helped wire his brain in such a way that he can say dad, I mean, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
It'd be crazy. But yeah, I'm not trying to get him high or anything like that. But maybe it's just a small dose on a regular basis that would get him there. I don't know. But the going back to Project AP, where they're focusing on more, like gene therapy technologies and stuff like emerging technologies. I think is a good way to look at it. Even stem cells are not totally understood. So
yeah, and that's from a legal standpoint. And really when you look into potentials, I think that probably is the best route and the best fit.
Yeah.
Everyone, people have an issue with me doing drugs in the safety of my own home.
Yeah.
With me, choosing to do something or even live a certain way, right? People have an issue still to this day with a man having sex with another man in the comfort of their own home. Yeah. That doesn't affect anyone else but them, right? And so if you put it through that lens, people have a huge issue with kids taking drugs, quote unquote. Yeah. And there was a great episode on Weedikit of, I think it was called Stoned Kids. It's one of the first 4 episodes available on Viceland. And
what's it called?
Weedikit. So it's all about cannabis.
Okay.
And it looks through
like
the lens.
Syndicate, but Weedikit.
Yeah. And it looks through the lens of how cannabis affects people through all different walks of life, through legality. I mean, they did an episode on veterans with PTSD. But this Stoned Kids episode, I think, was filmed largely in Oregon, and it was on kids with cancer. And the parents were giving them not microdoses, but probably some of the gnarliest macro doses of Rick Simpson oil, which is a very, very highly concentrated THC. And it has, of course, many of the other constituents in it, cannabinoids and terpenes as well. It's an organic product. But the kids are living and they're happy. And it allows them to eat, and it allows them to sleep, and it allows them to enjoy life. And it's such a beautiful episode because you see the kids and you see the families. And those families are worried. Like, is somebody going to take my child away from me? Yeah. Is this going to stop? Currently, at least when the episode was filmed, I think I watched it a couple years ago, they were able to do this. And, I don't know where that's gone. I don't know if they've done a follow-up episode or not, but at least at the time it was filmed, you could see that those kids have a quality of life that they did not have prior to cannabis use. Yeah. And that should nullify the fucking argument immediately. Yeah. Just to see that impact.
Yeah. And it really is quality of life that we're aiming for. Whether it's CRISPR or stem cells or whatever the therapy, increasing quality of life is our whole goal. My wife and I think of it as, Chow Chow is just going to be our roommate for life. And I mean, we love him, so it's going to be a great roommate. But, I'm going to be probably feeding this kid without intervention, hand feeding this kid for the rest of my life. And, one of the hardest things that I think about is, we all want to outlive our kids, obviously. But in this situation, what's going to happen to him? All of a sudden, all of a sudden, his dad is dead, and the person that's been feeding him and holding him and carrying him through his life what is going to happen? What is he going to think? without intervention, that's going to be a very confusing time for him. And I hope that something is there to where he at least better understands the situation and can do something about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck. I've never talked about that before. Jesus. Whew.
That's a big one.
Fuck.
Yeah, brother. That's a big one.
I've thought about it a lot, but I've never talked about that. Yeah, I mean, that's clearly a big fear that he, one day I'll die and he'll be alone. Fuck.
He's not going to be alone, though. He's got a big brother and a little sister.
Yeah, I mean, if it were up to me, we'd have just tons of kids. But, my wife's the one that she's... I don't think she'll ever go through another pregnancy. She just... that's a tough situation for any woman. But she's happy with 3. And, one of the reasons why we I mean, I've always wanted a big family, but one of the pluses for having more is that we're, increasing our son's circle of care for the rest of his life. But, I don't want to, I think about that too, like the burden of putting that on his siblings. Hopefully it's a burden that they are eager to take on. But, they didn't ask for that, Yeah. And so if we can do something to prevent that, that's the goal, finding something to a permanent therapy that gives him a quality of life, that gives him some independence, that lets him communicate, lets him eat regularly, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Fuck. Man, brother. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing and opening up.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, people, if they can go to project8p, the number 8.org, they can learn more about the syndrome and learn about what's the latest on the research. Obviously, if they're in a place where they can donate, there's a donate button. We can certainly use all the help we can get. If you are a scientist or know a scientist that might be interested in this condition, or reach out, send an email, and let us know for sure.
I'll link to everything in the show notes. You mentioned a Facebook group or two.
Yeah, I mean, there's a public Facebook group for this. I would have to look it up, but if you just look up 8p, the number 8, small letter p, deletion, duplication, you'll find it. And I'm sure it's on the website as well, project8p.org.
Thank you so much for coming on, brother.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Yeah.